Hey everyone, welcome back to the next few chapters of Ban This Book. We're going to continue reading it from yesterday, so we're going to be on page 48 right now, and we are reading until page 65, so another about 20 pages today. From yesterday's couple of chapters that we read, we found out that Amy Ann went to the board meeting, but she ended up being way too scared to be able to talk. And unfortunately, all those books that were supposed to get banned actually did get bans, and they're no longer in the library. But something interesting did happen on the bus on the way to school one day, and actually these books that are banned, some kids have these books on their shelves at home. So it sounds like they're starting to share their books, and it should be interesting to see what will happen from there. So we're going to continue reading on from page 48, and I hope from yesterday you remember that we had a question about what was the big idea that Amy Ann has. So this chapter is called The Big Idea. We'll probably figure that out. So let's get started. Like the main character in a book, I was finally going to do something. I was going to read every book Mrs. Spencer and her friends had banned from the school library. I found the list in the newspaper in the library, just like Danny said. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. Matilda by Roald Dahl. Harriet the Spy by Louis Fitzhugh. Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing Hahn. It's Perfectly Normal by Robbie H. Harris. From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frank Weiler by E. L. Konigsberg. All the Junie B. Jones books by Barbara Park. All the Captain Underpants books by Dave Pilkey. The Egypt Game by Zilpha Keatley Snyder. And all the Goosebumps books by R. L. Stein. Now, in the comments for this assignment, what I want you to do is I want you to tell me, have you heard of any of these books? Because I've definitely heard of almost all of these books. So in the comments down below for the Google Classroom assignment, I want you to let me know, have you heard of any of these books? Are any of these books something that you like? Would you be mad if this was banned from the school library? Tell me about that. It wasn't exactly 11 books, like Mrs. Spencer said. It was way more than 11 books when you counted all the gazillion Goosebumps books and the big shelf of Captain Underpants and Junie B. Jones books. I had already read 5 of the books on this list, if you count reading a couple of Goosebumps and a couple of Junie B. Jones books. The others I read were Matilda, awesome, Harriet the Spy, awesome, and From the Mixed Up Files, super awesome, of course. I never heard of It's Perfectly Normal or The Egypt Game, but The Egypt Game sounded especially good. It is a really good book, too. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and Wait Till Helen Comes I'd seen on the shelf, but I'd never checked them out because they look scary, and I'm not a big fan of scary books. But I was definitely going to read Wait Till Helen Comes now. I hadn't read Captain Underpants either, and I didn't want to. Captain Underpants was stupid. I would read that one last. The only book I was worried about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I knew that book, of course. It was on the shelf right beside Judy Blume's other books, like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, awesome, and Super Fudge, awesome. Shelbourne Elementary goes up through 6th grade, so some of the books in the library are for older kids. Are You There, God? Had a cover that said 6th grade to me, and I'd heard other girls whispering about it in the school bathroom. So I'd always stay away from it, but I was resolved. I was going to read each and every one of the books Mrs. Spencer said I couldn't, just to spite her. I knew she'd never know, and that it wasn't like I was doing something that would help Mrs. Jones get the books back on the shelves. But I'd still felt a secret thrill at doing something an adult told me not to do. I want you to stop and think, what do you think Amy Ann means when she says that she's doing this just to spite her? I was going to read each and every one of the books Mrs. Spencer said I couldn't, just to spite her. What do we think that means? So use those context clues and think about, what do you think she's feeling in that moment? Why is she saying that? That afternoon, I emptied my piggy bank out, not breaking it like Jamie did in front of the mixed up files, and counted it up. $21.66. That was enough for 2 paperbacks at least. I asked Mom and Dad if we could go to the bookstore that night, and their reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Are you sure that's what you want to spend your money on? Dad asked. Why do parents always say that when you tell them you want to buy something with your own money? I knew what he really meant. He meant, I don't think that's how you should spend your money. Yes, that is what I want to spend my money on, I thought, and this time I actually said it. Mom and Dad had one of those silent conversations with their eyes again, and Dad sighed and said he'd run me to the bookstore after dinner. I need new shoes at the ballet store, Alexis said. Angelina hopped up and down. I want to go for frozen yogurt. I need to hit the office store, Mom said. If we left now, we just have time to grab tacos and do all four. Suddenly, my trip to the bookstore had become a family outing. Before I could even think something I wasn't going to say, Dad was fishing his keys out of the bowl by the door, and the dogs were barking and whining as we left. Alexis, Angelina, and I climbed into the back of our car. Angelina's car seat was in the middle. I squeezed into one of the other sides, pushing toys and Cheerios onto the floor. The whole car still reeked of spoiled milk from the drink Angelina had spilled a month ago, and before we had even left the neighborhood, Thing 1 and Thing 2 were whining. The sun is on me, Alexis said. I'm hot. You can sit on the other side when we leave the office store, Dad told her, which meant I was going to have to sit on the hot side in the sun. No one cared about me yet, about that. Amy Ann is touching me, Angelina whines. Mom, Amy Ann is touching me. Amy Ann, please don't touch your sister, Mom said. Her car seat takes up half of the back seat. How am I not supposed to touch her? Amy Ann, Mom said. I crossed my arms and slouched against the car door, trying to get as far away from Princess Angelina and her throne as possible. Now, do you see why I never say anything? Nobody ever listens anyway. We're going to be at the bookstore too long, are we? Or we're not going to be at the bookstore too long, are we? Alexa said. No, not long, no, Dad said. Now if we want to get all the other things done and be home before bedtime. Going to the bookstore was the whole reason we were going out in the first place. And now it was something I had to squeeze in so there'd be time for frozen yogurt. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. It didn't matter. I had enough money in my pocket for 2 paperbacks at least, and I already knew what books I wanted. Danny was going to loan me Wait Till Helen Comes, so I was going to buy The Egypt Game and It's Perfectly Normal, whatever that was, and I was going to read them both that very night. Alright, this next chapter is super short, not a novel. So it turns out It's Perfectly Normal is not a novel. It's a nonfiction book all about sex, as Mrs. Spencer said, with pictures. Yeesh. The Windigo. This is the next chapter. We're on page 54. I was so embarrassed when I saw what It's Perfectly Normal was about. I'd even asked somebody at the bookstore to help me find it. I could have died. As soon as I saw what it was, I put it back on the shelf really fast and ran away. I mean, there's stuff in there I do have questions about, and Mom and I have already talked about some of it, but I was not going to buy that book with my family right there. Instead, I bought The Egypt Game, which was a novel, and Scary Stories, a bunch of short stories, and read them both that night. Wow, The Egypt Game was great. It's about these kids who built this pretend Egyptian altar in a creepy guy's backyard, and the mysterious things start happening, like maybe the Egyptian god is leaving them messages, I guess. It got banned because somebody didn't like that the kids worshipping Egyptian gods, even if it was pretend. And there's somebody attacking kids in the neighborhood too, which is kind of scary, but the book was really awesome. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I read in the dark, in bed, which was a mistake. Oh my gosh, I'm still shaking. There's a story in there called The Red Spot about a girl who has a spider crawl on her face. That's bad enough. But the spider bites her or something and it leaves a big red spot on her cheek. Her mom says it'll go away, but it doesn't, and a few days later it explodes and hundreds of baby spiders come crawling out of her face. And even worse, there are those creepy pictures. I called the dog to come and sit with me in bed while I read it, but even that didn't help. And another story called High Beams, a woman driving a car at night can't figure out why the car behind her keeps flashing its high beams at her. It turns out a killer snuck into the backseat of her car, and the other driver saw it, and every time the killer rises up to attack her, the car behind her turns on the high beams to stop him. Mom, Amy Ann still has her light on and I can't sleep. Alexis called, making me jump. Mom appeared at our door looking tired. Amy Ann, you know I don't mind you reading, but Alexis needs her sleep, and you do too. I nodded and pulled my blankets up high over me. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. But I still wanted to read another story. I turned to one called The Windigo. It was about a man and his guide hunting in a part of Canada where nobody else ever goes. One night, the wind starts calling the name of his guide, and something comes swooping down out of the dark and snatches him up and flies away with him. The guide screams something about his feet being on fire, and then he's gone. The hunter splits, but later on, he's by a campfire when a strange man wrapped up in a blanket sits down next to him. The hunter is sure it's his old guide, the man who disappeared that night. The hunter can't see his face, and the strange man won't answer any of his questions. The hunter decides to lift the man's hat off of his head, and underneath he sees Mom! Amy Ann is reading with her flashlight, Alexis cries, and I screamed and exploded out from under my blanket. Alexis screamed because I had surprised her, and the dogs went crazy, barking like the mailman had suddenly appeared in my room. And the whole ruckus brought Mom running. What's going on in here? She asked. Nothing. Hugging Flat and Jet with both arms across the room, Alexis stared at me in horror. Mom frowned. Whatever's going on, I need lights out and for you both to go to sleep. I nodded and Mom left. Clicked my flashlight off and stuffed scary stories to tell in the dark under my mattress where I couldn't see it. I finally got Flotsam and Jetsam settled back down and pulled my blanket up over my heads. But I knew I wasn't going to sleep that night, or maybe ever again. That is a scary book. Have you guys ever read that book? Because that is a spooky book. And if you haven't read it yet, I would highly recommend it if you like scary stories. All right, the next chapter is called Our Own Little Book Club. And this is on page 58. Danny Purcell brought Wait Till Helen Comes on Monday, and I read it that night. It was awesome. It was scary, but not scary stories to tell in the dark scary. The little girl in it, the one with the funny haircut on the cover, is so creepy. She hates her new stepbrother and stepsister, and she tells them a ghost she met in the graveyard is going to come after them and punish them for being mean to her. When Rebecca finished from the mixed up files, which she liked, mostly I think because Mrs. Frankweiler is all the time talking to her lawyer, she read Danny's copy of Wait Till Helen Comes while Danny read from the mixed up files. It's like we had our own little book club. Rebecca caught me in my locker at the end of lunch one day. Amy Ann, I looked all over for you in the cafeteria. Where were you? I got a pass to go to the library instead, I told her. Even though my favorite book still wasn't on the shelf, there were lots of other library books I wanted to read. Oh, I see how it is, Rebecca said, pretending to be angry. You love books more than your best friends. Well, I don't need you. I've got Helen. She's my only real friend, even though nobody else can see her. You just wait till Helen comes. Then you'll be sorry. And cracked up, laughing together. Danny lapped over to us and brushed his hair out of his eyes. Hey, what's so funny? We could barely answer him. We were laughing so hard. Just wait till Helen comes, I said, trying to sound spooky. Then you'll be sorry. Is that from that book? Danny said. No, for joking about it before I read it. I've only just finished Basil E. Frankweiler, and I want to read that scary stories book next. I froze and shook my head, my eyes wide. I hid it. I told him. Why? Danny said. Is it really scary? I let out a little squeak. Danny pulled my locker door open wide. Where is it? I want to read it. The book wasn't in my locker. It wasn't under my mattress anymore either. I hadn't been able to sleep knowing it was there. Right at that moment, it was hidden in an old gym bag at the back of my closet, buried under a pile of clothes. I grabbed my locker door to close it and explain why Scary Stories wasn't there. And that's when I saw it. There was a note in my locker mailbox. Now, from the earlier on in the books, they talked about how in their lockers, they have these little kind of drawers, I guess. And in those drawers, people can slip notes through the door of their locker because there's usually little like holes in lockers. So they'll slip a note in through the locker and then it will drop into this little box for these kids, kind of like a mailbox. And our main character, Amy Ann, she almost never gets notes. So This is a really big deal for her to get a note. So I wonder what's going to be in this note. Also, have you ever read anything so scary or saw anything so scary that you just couldn't stop thinking about it? I know I have for sure. So I hope she can get over that soon and share that book with other people. All right, the next chapter is called A Notable Note, and this is on page 61. I didn't notice it right off because I had gotten used to not getting any notes, but something white and folded was definitely sticking up out of my locker mailbox. I must have stood and stared at it for a long time because Rebecca had to wave her hand in front of my face to get my attention. Hey, Earth to Amy Ann! You look like you just saw Helen's ghost. I pointed to the note. Did you send me a note? Rebecca shook her hands. Never leave a paper trail, she reminded me. Then a horrible thought struck her, and she turned to Danny. You didn't send her a note, did you? Danny took a step back. Hey, whoa, send a note to a girl? No way. Rebecca relaxed. If Danny had written me a note, I don't know which of us she would have killed first. Who else would send me a note? I asked. Well, I know a good way to find out, Danny said. You could read it and find out. I pulled out the note and unfolded it. It was a piece of notebook paper torn out of a spiral notebook with pink, loopy handwriting on it. AA. Danny said you have the Egypt game. Can I read it? Jonna. It's from Jonna Park, I said. She wants to borrow the Egypt game? Oh yeah, I told her you had a copy, Danny said. My heart skipped a beat. Jonna Park had written me a note. Jonna Park had written me a note and called me AA. No one had ever called me AA before. I liked it. Jana was one of the girls who had always been following Danny around, like Rebecca. Jana probably liked Danny's hair as much as he did. I was surprised he'd even mentioned the Egypt game to her, since he'd only heard me talking to Rebecca about it on the bus. But I was excited that someone else wanted to read it. Good books shouldn't be hidden away. They should be read by as many people as possible. I wrote a note back to Jana and stuck it in her locker before going back to class. Jana, sure, I'll bring it tomorrow. Hey. Jana came to my locker the next day after lunch. I passed her the Egypt game in secret, like we were in a spy movie. Thanks, she said. Then she stood there and didn't leave. You're welcome, I said. She still didn't leave. What is it? I asked her. Jana looked around, then said quietly, do you have any of the other books? If I wanted to read any of them? Oh yeah, I said. I've got From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but it's really, really scary. And Danny's got Wait Till Helen Comes, but he'd probably already told you that. Oh, Shauna said. Is that all? She looked at my locker as though the other books might be in there. She was disappointed, I could tell, and suddenly the only thing I wanted in the world was to please her, because she had written me a note and called me AA. Those are the only ones I have now, I told her, but if there's any other one you want to read, I can probably get it. I'm saving up. I ran through the titles in my head. Is it Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret? She shook her head, and I felt a little relieved. I was still afraid of that one. Is it Harriet the Spy? She shook her head. Goosebumps? Nope. Journey B? No. Matilda? Nope. Who else could it be left? Couldn't be Captain Underpants. The only one left. Oh, she wanted to read that one. Rebecca popped up beside us. Jana and I jumped. Okay, thanks, bye, Jana said, and she hurried away. What was that all about? Rebecca asked. Jana borrowed the Egypt game for me, but I think she wants to read a different one of those banned books instead. Which one? I whispered. The sex book. It's perfectly normal. I grabbed a braid and held it close to my mouth, but I can't buy that one. That was on the list, Rebecca said. You don't have to buy the one. I got it. My eyes went wide. She had a copy? At your house? I asked. Yeah, she said. She acted like it was no big thing. My mom gave it to me. I think that way I couldn't sue her one day for not telling me everything before I need to know it. Have you read it? I whispered. Rebecca leaned in breathlessly. Some parts. I wanted to ask her which parts and what it said, but I was too embarrassed. I jumped as Mrs. Vaughn called us into class down the hall. Will you bring it? I asked her as we ran to class. Rebecca stopped at the door. Okay, she said with a secret smile, and she threw open the door and ran inside. With Rebecca's book and Danny's book and my books, I could have almost half the books Mrs. Spencer banned from the library sitting in my locker by tomorrow, where anybody could read them, not just me. Which is when I got an even bigger idea than the one I had before. And that is the end of that chapter. So we're ending this chapter knowing that she has an even bigger idea now. So I wonder what that is going to be. But it sounds like Amy Ann is changing her locker into basically like a little library where people can say, I want this book, and if she has it, she can let them borrow it. So I wonder if this is going to be a good plan, if more people read the books, but what if she gets in trouble too? So there's a lot of possibilities for things to happen, but I will see you in the next video tomorrow for the next 20 pages of this book. See you tomorrow. Bye.